Hello, YouTube.
Jimmy, thank you so much for doing this.
It is my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for taking the time. And I was just curious about your life and career, and if you had any advice for people who want to get involved in this insanity.
Come to Northern Michigan University and study with us.
Well, you heard it. Yeah. That's exactly what you should do. Alrighty. So yeah, I'm basically copying James Lipton, God rest his soul.
Right.
And where were you born?
I was born in the Philippine Islands in a Navy super base called Subic Bay Naval Base. My dad's a surgeon. Doctors are always doctors. He did a program where, and I think you can still do this, you join the armed services and then they pay for either college or med school or something, and then you owe them time. You know about this. So Dad owed the Navy 4 years after med school because they helped pay for med school. And so he said, okay, where are we going? And he and my mom were already married. And they said, you're going to the Philippines. And they already had my older brother, who was, I think, like 1 year old at that point, and Mom was pregnant. And they were like, okay, we're going to the Philippines. And
the brother who works here?
Yes, the brother who was, my brother who was the band director over at, director of bands over at Marquette High School and now works here sometimes too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm. And I've never been back since we left. I think I was almost 3 when we left. And it's always been on my bucket list. I have to get back to where my feet first hit the ground. And I've not been back to the Philippines since then. I was supposed to go as part of my 50th birthday, but instead we had a baby. So going to the Philippines kind of went whoop, out the window. Yeah.
Babies will change your plans.
Yeah.
Yeah, babies
will change every plan all the time.
Yeah.
Which is awesome, which is why you do that, right? You go on that roller coaster ride.
Those tiny people have such power.
They do.
Yeah.
They run you.
They really do. Yeah. So then you moved to the Upper Peninsula.
In stages. So we came back from, my dad is from Port Huron, Michigan, which is down just to the north and sort of east of Detroit. That's where he grew up. And then he had always wanted to be a country doctor. That was his goal in life. Just this romantic goal in life. And finished med school, came back to the States and did his surgical residency in Grand Rapids at a hospital there called Blodgett. So we were in GR until I was, I think, maybe 5. And then we moved to first Crystal Falls, which is over on the west, sort of the southern tier of the Upper Peninsula, west of here. And then after a couple of years there, moved to a more permanent home in Iron River, Michigan. Good old Rusty Creek, Michigan.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
And that's where I grew up. Went to high school there.
Okay, so you went to high school here in the UP.
Mm-hmm.
Do you consider yourself a Youper? I know that's a whole debate. I'm definitely not.
I don't get to be one because I wasn't born here.
Yeah, I guess you got to be. All right.
I guess I would say that I'm an immigrant to the UP that most people are okay with, just because I know it really well and I've been here a long time. But also, didn't go to college here, went far away and spent a long time away from the UP, and now I'm back. So, I mean, I know of Youpers, and Youpers are like such a big part of my experience as a human, but I could call myself a Youper in my heart, but I don't think a lot of people would call me that.
Yeah, there's many people who are very serious about that. Like,
yes.
You have to be, or
yes.
You can be grandfathered in. I've heard that term as well. Anyway, it's a never-ending debate with you people. It really is.
Yes, it very much is.
Yeah. So you graduated high school, and then where did you get your undergraduate?
So a little backstory. My high school, when I was a sophomore in high school at West Iron County High School in Iron River, Michigan, the local community decided to vote down the tax package that funds the schools. So when I was a sophomore, our school didn't open because they didn't have any money. And when they finally did open, after several emergency votes, all arts had been eviscerated. All of our arts teachers, mostly, unless they were like had, you know, millions of years there were pink slipped and taken away, and we were just basically taught reading, writing, and arithmetic through the end of that. There were some people that stayed, but I lost interest in any kind of arts then because I just couldn't wait to get the heck out of there. And then I got to Michigan. I went to Michigan for undergrad because my dad went there, my uncle went there, my grandfather, my grandmother. I mean, it's my whole, I'm like a third generation University of Michigan grad. And I was pre-med at Michigan because I had no idea that arts were even a thing that you could do to make a living. So I got to Michigan, not really happy with pre-med, doing fine, but not really happy with it. And somebody, and John, to this day, I cannot remember who said this. Somebody said, you should take an acting class. They're a lot of fun. And I was like, okay, I'll take an acting class. Walked in, did like my first week in that class. And there was this voice in my head that was like, no, it's this. This is the thing that you need to do. And that was it. I switched my major at the end of my sophomore year in college to theater. My parents lost their minds, and then they came back to their senses a little while later. And then I actually had to go to grad school for acting because I just didn't know what I was doing. Mm-hmm. I hadn't had the benefit of having somebody kind of take me from the beginning to the end because I got to it so late. So that's what I did in grad school in Seattle. So it was undergrad was Michigan in Ann Arbor, and then grad school was the University of Washington in Seattle, where I lived for 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So someone, and you can't remember who, literally said, hey, you know, an acting class would be a fun thing to do.
I wish I could figure that out. Like, it's lost in my brain. I remember the line. I remember somebody saying that to me. You should take an acting class. But I don't even know how. If I had a time machine, that would be one of the trips I would take, is to try to figure out, like, to be a fly on the wall for that scene and be like, oh, it was that person, because I have no idea.
Well, yeah, it's like one of those things where you want to either maybe thank them or you want to just learn who they are.
Yeah, or like, I mean, that person, I guess, is sort of entitled to about 10% of my career earnings. They're not going to get it.
Well, maybe you should not meet them. Then maybe
yes.
that, yeah.
You should just stay. No, never mind. I don't want to know.
You know what? Nobody told him that. It was, if you're watching.
It's a voice from the heavens.
Yeah.
It was some spiritual guidance, I guess. My guardian angel. I don't know.
Nobody owes anybody anything. All right. So then you do grad school, mm-hmm. You moved to New York City.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Do you remember, I mean, what was your first paid gig in New York City, or like one of your first paid gigs in New York City?
This is great. This is a fun story. So I went to grad school in Seattle, which is, Seattle's an amazing town. It's great. It's crunchy granola. The Pacific Northwest is this really cool part of the country that most people don't really go to, because you have to it's like the UP, you have to really want to go there. Otherwise you just don't, because it's not really on the way to anything unless you're going to Alaska, right? So as part of our final year in the program, we did a showcase, which was, a short evening of scenes to kind of showcase each performer in the class. And you take that showcase to the two major cities besides your own that are artistic places where you can get like real work. So mm-hmm. for us, it was, we put the showcase performance together, and then we went to New York, and then we went to LA, and we went back to Seattle. And I actually got an agent in New York, and I had some casting directors that liked me, liked my work, and were like, when are you coming to New York? So I go back to, and I kind of made this deal with myself. If I get interest anywhere, like if nobody like wants me or is interested in my work, if I get sort of a from showcase, I'm just gonna stay in Seattle and I'll figure it out.
Right.
But I had this person in New York who was like, no, I want to sign you. I want you to be part of our agency. So I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm going to New York. So I had this old beat up Ford Taurus, Doris the Taurus, and I
gave the car a name.
Doris. You have to give your car a name.
Well, yeah.
Cars must have names.
It's a prerequisite to getting a vehicle.
It is. I mean, and the name usually suggests itself. But Doris was just like so good. She was very loyal, very faithful. She hung in for a long time. But I sold everything I owned that wouldn't fit in the car, right, and then loaded my car up in like the beginning of the summer, or late in the summer. No, it was in May. It was before the summer. May of '93. I loaded Doris up in Seattle, and I said goodbye to my Seattle friends, who were all by the way, like, what are you doing? Seattle's so cool. Why would you go to New York City? It's a shit show out there. Pardon my French.
Well, it's a wild thing to do.
It's nutty. And I was like, I made this deal with myself. I got to at least go try. And I got to New York, and I had the agent, so people were sending me out, and I got very lucky, I will say. I was in New York for about 5 weeks before I booked my first job. And it was a union job. It was like a real paying gig. And it ended up being the out-of-town tryout for a show that 2 years later I was doing off-Broadway. So it was my professional, my first audition became my professional debut and eventually my off-Broadway debut. And it's still a show that gets done a lot to this day, and I'm on the cast album, and all of those things just sort of fell on me as soon as I got to New York, which is good and bad. And I'll tell you why in a minute, but that was how it worked out. I got very, very lucky.
Wow. Now, this show you're referring to, that doesn't happen to be Spamalot, does it? No.
It does not. It is a little two-hander musical, and by two-hander I mean two actors. That's mostly sung through, like the whole show is sung through. It's called John and Jen, and it is the story of, in the first act, John and Jen are brother and sister, and in the second act, they are mother and son. So in the first act, you play the brother to Jen, and in the second act, I would play Jen's son.
Wow.
And it was a really cool piece. In the first act, they are two little kids kind of banding together against an abusive father. And at the end of the first act, and it's set in the early 60s, and in the 50s actually, and then you follow their growth through time. So by the end of the first act, John is 18, and it's the Vietnam War, and Jen has left and gone to New York and become like a beatnik.
A what?
Like a beatnik, like a hippie. You know what I mean? And it's
I knew what that was.
I
knew exactly what that was.
So she's become this like anti-war, and when she left a couple years before, she stopped sort of kind of providing protection to John. So it was just him and this abusive father, and John becomes very sort of conservative and angry, and joins the military and goes to Vietnam.
Okay.
And at the end of the first act, is killed in Vietnam. So Jen is having to process the death of her brother that she feels responsible for, and then in the second act, she has a son. She names him John in memory of her deceased brother, and then proceeds to just be this like helicopter parent, smother mother, trying to right the wrongs that she did on the first relationship with her son.
Wow.
So it's about coming to equality and equity in that relationship in the second act. It's a beautiful show. It still is one of the hardest things I've ever done, and it was I'm really proud of it.
Now this is just we can cut this part out. Was it John?
No, it's John. Yes, it is John. Yes.
It was a John, who then joined the army.
Yes. Well, actually, no. In this, he joins the Navy and becomes an aviator, which is a little bit of a stretch, but
he joins the Navy.
Okay,
we're definitely cutting this out. No, I'm just kidding. My wife was in the Navy. It's okay. And your father was in the.
That's right.
Yeah.
And my grandfather served in World War II.
Jimmy, I apologize for insulting the Navy.
No, it's great.
All right, so.
Go Navy.
Yeah. So you do Spamalot.
Yeah, and that was a long time, right, between one and the other. So here's the other thing. This is about the actor's career, right? So if you get to New York and you have a lot of success immediately, which I was lucky enough to do, then there's this moment when that show ends, because every show ends. Barely any show runs forever. Many of them run a long time. A tiny percentage of shows run a long time, but most shows run for a very short amount of time, and then you're done. And you have to get the next thing. So you're always scrapping for whatever's next. And John and Jen ended, and I was like, okay, next.
Right.
Months.
Yeah.
John, months. It was 8 months, and I was working day jobs and, being a bartender and a waiter, and just that's horrible soul-stealing work. Now, bartending's more fun than waiting tables. but it was hard because you had to deal with this roller coaster that is the career. So it took 10 years for me to get to Broadway.
Wow.
It took a decade.
10 years in New York City
Mm-hmm.
on the grind before you got to Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
So that it was a 10-year ladder before.
Yes.
Yeah.
Little Shop of Horrors was, I think, almost to the day 10 years, because Little Shop of Horrors was, I think, 2003, and I'd gotten there in 93. Yeah, so that's right about in the 10-year range. And then Spamalot was like a year later.
So Little Shop of Horrors, can you talk to us a little bit about that? Because I had heard that Northern was considering potentially doing it.
Still considering it. It's a great show.
Yeah. So who did you play in Little Shop of Horrors?
I played the dentist.
Okay.
Which is an absolute blast of a role. I was a cover, an offstage cover for both the dentist and for Seymour, but I was the first cover for the dentist and went on a bunch of times, and that was my Broadway debut.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And that was your first taste of what Broadway's like, about what it's like to perform under that kind of pressure?
Well, yeah, and also another taste of the transience of the business, because 10 years waiting for your Broadway debut, and then you get it. I got it, and I came into the show, and they rehearsed me, and I went into the show, and then I did shows, and I'm already, I'm visions of sugar plums, right? Like, I'm making real money, because the Broadway contract is the flagship contract for Equity, right? Which is the professional actors union, and it's like you can make a lot of money, and I was making more money than this is amazing, and just as I'm starting to think, we'll buy furniture and we'll get this and we'll go on a great vacation, I came in to the theater, and there were a couple producers wandering around backstage. And I learned a cardinal rule that day, which is if there's one producer wandering around backstage at your show, that's okay, because they're probably there to do some money thing or talk to somebody about press for something, or they're just stopping in to see everybody and say hi. If there's more than one producer, it means you're closing.
Wow.
So I barely got there. I think that whole job for me was maybe 6 weeks. And, most regional theater jobs at that point were 8 weeks. So it was not even, it was Broadway, but it was like, gone. And then all of a sudden I was out of a job again.
Wow.
Yep.
So I understand that you never really know in any business, but you really never know in this business. Would you say that's accurate?
I would say it's even, in a way, it's even better in that in the world when people lose jobs, that when businesses dry up and people lose jobs, it's always this huge shock.
That's rough.
Like, oh my God, that's terrible. You had security. In the acting world, in the freelance world of the artist, there is no such thing as security. Never is. Because anything you could be doing could just go away.
Yeah.
At any moment. And I actually, from being in New York for as long as I was, watched like established jobs go away overnight. Not acting, but other work. And I just remember thinking, wow, I'm much better equipped for this than these people are. Just because the point of being a professional artist is that you lose every job you ever get, because that's the nature of the biz. Every job has a start date and usually has an end date.
Yeah. Do you think that your dad being in the Navy sort of made you better equipped for this line of work in a way?
I don't think so, just because I was too young to understand because my dad had mustered out by the time we got to Michigan, and he was in the reserves, but he never left. He wasn't back on active duty, so we never moved around like a lot of military kids did. No, we were set.
Okay.
So the transient life that military families have was not my upbringing. But I could see there's an argument to be made if your parents were active duty military, or one of both of them, or whatever, a little bit more about what it feels like to be an actor. Although I think it's much harder on kids, because adults can just make friends wherever they go if they have that skill set, and it's much harder for kids. Much harder.
And I think about well, we won't name drop, I suppose, but somebody in the BFA program whose dad was in the Army and like who had to move around a lot and make new friends and
It's hard.
and adapt.
Yeah, it's really hard. It makes. I think it gives you a certain skill set, but I would rather develop that skill set as an adult than as a child. I think that's hard for kids.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, one of the reasons I got out.
Yeah,
but
understand.
But yeah, so takes you 10 years to get to Broadway. You get to Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
You experience. I mean, was it, I guess, what you were expecting, or was it not what you were expecting, or a combination of the two?
At the end of the day, Broadway is just another place.
Yeah.
Now, is there a lot more money involved? Is it a lot starrier? Are there weird moments where you turn around and, I mean, when we were on Spamalot, we were the toast of the town. We were the 5,000-pound gorilla. We won the Tony. We were going to run forever. We had very fancy stars and a iconic director who knew all of Hollywood, so everybody had to come and see it. That was bizarre, just because you turn around and you're like, oh, Lawrence Fishburne, you're so tall. You know? And literally backstage, like I'm coming out of the theater and I'm going downstairs like, boom. You know, and I'm literally like it's Lawrence Fishburne's like mid sternum is like, and I'm 6 feet tall, right? So he's huge. He's a huge dude. And hi, I'm Lawrence Fishburne. You know, it's like,
you just feel like a kid.
Yeah, a little bit. That part is weird. But the other part of it is you begin to realize that, oh wow, these are just people. You know, these are people who are really good at things, at certain things, and that gave them the opportunity to have this career that they have. But they're also just people, and treating them as such takes practice. Because initially, as like coming into a show like that, you're just like, and
they probably don't like that.
No, they hate it.
Right.
Because they're just normal people, and then you know, it's like that line in the Joe Walsh song, "Life's Been Good."
Life's been good to me so far.
Yeah. So there's this. What's the lyric? Jesus 185. Yeah, not that one, but the other one. It's tough to handle this fortune and fame. Everybody's so different. I haven't changed. Right? So they're still the same people they've always been, and all of a sudden their whole world just shifts, and it's full of these like money people and sycophants, if you know what that means, like people who just come around and go, you know, at whatever they do, and it messes with your mind.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I did everything I could to reset my expectations all the time, even though I'd be like, my God, that's Tim Curry, my God, that's Hank Azaria, my God, that's David Hyde Pierce, and my God, that's Mike freaking Nichols. I mean,
it's hard to not be like a bit starstruck.
It was
first.
you had to be really active about it. You know, Mike Nichols' longtime partner was Diane Sawyer, you know, and you know, who's just one of the nicest human beings, and she's stunningly beautiful, and it's just very hard. She turned to everybody into like a high schooler. I watched her talk to Hank Azaria, and he was just like speaking, and you could tell he was awestruck by her. We all were, right? So those moments were really interesting and cool, and also teaching moments, which is like, wow, these are just people. These are just people.
Right.
They have all the things that we do. They live in this. They have found their way into this strange world, and that's part of their cross to bear.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you talk to me a little bit about auditioning for Spamalot and then the 5-year run that you had with that show?
So my audition experience for Spamalot was bizarre because I auditioned for it twice. The first time around, they were not interested in me.
Okay.
And I was so excited to audition for that show because I've always been a huge Monty Python fan. When I was in college, when my brother went away to college, he came home. I was still living, you know, we were still in Iron River. I was a senior in high school. He came home with a cassette tape of this very funny group of people doing things. And what I didn't know was that it was the soundtrack album of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And they didn't just take the soundtrack of the movie, they actually made a comedy album of the movie. So it was this very meta thing that Python always does. And I learned that thing backwards and forwards before I ever saw the film. Like I knew the comedy album only as sounds in my ear. So when the audition came up, when we heard about, my God, they're doing a musical of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, I have to get in for this. They're totally going to want me because I'm such a huge Python. Well, it turns out every Python in America who was an actor was thinking the exact same thing, and there were jillions of them. And I was one of those jillions, and I had this great comedy song that I was going to do. And the comedy song had this moment where it had like a pause in it for comedic effect. And I was singing my song, and the pause came up, and I took the pause, and they said, "Great, thanks so much for coming in." I was like, there's more to the song. There's more.
Right.
And they were like, well, yeah, go ahead, finish the song. And in my head, I'm like, they have no interest in me whatsoever. Oh my God. And it was a huge disappointment. Like, it was really.
Yeah.
And then months later, the show was cast, and they started rehearsals, and they were minutes into rehearsal when, I should say, leading up to this, I, as it turned out, had recently worked with the guy who was one of the covers in the show, was hired as one of the covers, so an understudy. We had just done a play together, a comedy, and he was one of the funniest people I had ever met, but he'd never covered a show. He didn't know how to understudy, didn't know how to cover.
Just didn't.
And he'd been assigned like 5 tracks to cover. And they were a week into rehearsal, and he calls me. And he's like, "Jimmy, I'm drowning. I don't know how to do this. I'm drowning. I'm in trouble. You have to help me." Because I had just done Little Shop, and I had covered Little Shop, and I had learned a lot about covering and being an understudy. And I was like, okay. And I tried to walk him through it. I was like, everything's gonna be fine. Everything's gonna be fine. He's like, "No, they're already asking me to go on in rehearsals, and I'm not prepared, and I'm really freaking out, and I don't know what to do. And I'm not funny because I'm so worried about what I'm doing, and I just don't know what I'm doing." And I was like, okay, just one scene at a time, right? Like, you learn one scene, get that, and then move on to the next. That's your beachhead, right? You've achieved this beachhead, and then you expand your territory, right? And they ended up firing him.
Mm.
They fired him. They bought out his whole contract. He had signed a year contract.
Wow.
They bought out his contract. And I heard about that, and was like, oh man, I am so sorry. That sucks. My heart is breaking for you. And my phone rings, and it's my agent. And he's like, "Hey, how would you like to audition for Mike Nichols, director of Spamalot?" I was like, this is for Dan's track, isn't it? This is for him. And he was like, "Yeah, he's getting fired. They haven't fired. He's going to finish the week, but they need to replace him. They need to replace him. You would start rehearsal in less than 48 hours. You would start in a day and a half."
Thank you for the heads up. Mm-hmm. Wow.
So
that's insane.
I went to the audition, and this time was a much different experience because they were in need.
Right.
They needed somebody who knew how to do this well. They needed somebody who understood the comedy, and they needed somebody they could just drop in and go. And I had friends behind the table now because the choreographer, Casey Nicolau, who has since become this iconic director choreographer who I deeply love. I love his work. And he's become one of these guys now who has multiple Broadway shows running every season. It couldn't happen to a better guy. He's just one of the best. And I remember first they were already in rehearsal, so the audition was being held after rehearsal. So I showed up early with all the other people that they were auditioning, and it was a small amount. And the doors to the main rehearsal room opened. This is a place called New 42 Studios on 42nd Street between Broadway and 8th. And
that's
all
New
of
York
these,
City, for those who don't know. New York City.
Yes.
It's a small town.
The Big Apple, we love it. All these, fancy people came out, and people I knew, and people I'd done shows with, and all that. Hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? Oh my God, are you? Oh wow, okay, yeah, kill it. And then my friend, who I had worked with, who was getting fired, walks out, and he sees me, and I'm like, oh man,
yeah,
this is so awkward. Yes, I'm here, and I'm auditioning to replace you. And to this man's credit, what a good soul. He walked right up to me, and he said, "Come here." And he walked me over to the corner, away from the other people who were auditioning, and he basically gave me the audition. Gave it to me. He's like, "Here's what you do. Here's what we were doing in rehearsal. You cannot go too far, and just bucked me up and said, "You've got this. You helped me out when I needed you. I know it didn't work out, but now I'm gonna help you out."
Wow.
And we went in, and there was Casey Nicholaus smiling behind there, sitting next to Mike Nichols. And I start the audition, and I sing, and then we do one of the sides, and then we do the French taunter scene. The French taunter.
Well,
You don't threaten us English pig dogs, right?
Yeah.
You know this well.
And that is a French accent.
It is French. And what's funny is I finished my first take on the scene, and Mike leans forward and goes, "Are you French?"
That's a very good sign.
And in my head I went, "I'm gonna get this job.
Yep.
I'm gonna get this job. I am gonna get this job." And finished the audition, and
is your heart pounding out of your chest? Pounding out of your chest.
And walked out of the room, and about an hour later my phone rang, and it was my agent, and he said, "You got it." And
an hour later?
About an hour, yeah, because they were on a very tight timeline, because they needed to do a contract with me, get it signed, and get me in the room as quickly as possible.
So now can we assume that you did not sleep for about 120 hours after that, and you just...
No, it's worse than that.
It's worse.
I didn't sleep for probably 3 weeks.
Okay.
Because I knew that the guy before me, who wasn't quite up to snuff for all the reasons, right? For whatever reason, they had fired.
Right.
So I was like, if I don't get my shit together, if I don't crush this, if I don't deliver on this as soon as I humanly possibly can, they're going to buy me out, and I will not be in this what's probably going to be a generational show.
Yeah.
And so it was two of us, male covers, myself and Johnny Bolton, who is another one of the best humans on the face of the planet, incredibly talented actor, gone on to do just wonderful things, show after show after show, still in the biz, still doing amazing things. And we had 4 more days in New York when I joined the company, and then we were headed to Chicago for the out-of-town tryout. We were going to be in Chicago for a couple months, like doing the tech there and fixing it and getting the show together and doing the first tryout on the road before we bring it into Broadway. And both John and I realized that if we don't deliver, we're screwed.
Yeah.
So they got they got short-term apartments for us, like business apartments for us in downtown Chicago, right on Millennium Park, right down the street from where the theater was. And we slept with our scripts, we ate with our scripts. We would call it lunch and lines. And we would get together and we would make some lunch, and while we're doing it, we're running lines,
yep.
right? And we're running, okay, now you be Sir Robin and I'll be Sir Lancelot. Good, okay, let's run it again. Now I'm going to be Not Dead Fred and you're going to be Sir Robin. Okay, let's run it again. Now I'm going to be Sir Robin and you're going to be Lancelot. And we would do that on a loop for 3 weeks, 2 weeks. I think I had terminal diarrhea the entire time. We were just terrified.
Diarrhea and lines.
Yes.
That's what you got to do.
But we were terrified because it was just, we didn't, and some of the leads were not feeling well. One of the guys I covered got a very bad cold right before they opened for previews, and so I was like, okay. And then miraculously he recovered because he was like, I got to get my shit together because I got to make sure this works. So yeah, and ultimately I did not go on in Chicago. But when we came back to New York and went back into rehearsal to open it on Broadway, they don't rehearse the understudies until the show is open. Because if the show is still being changed, generally you don't want to be rehearsing people that you then have to re-rehearse the changes.
Right.
So we opened for previews. We did one preview, and then I got a call, you're on. I had not had a rehearsal.
Wow.
I had not had a rehearsal, I had not had a put in, I had not had anything. So I went on in a principal track in a Broadway show for a generational, what was going to be a Tony winning show with no rehearsal. And I crushed it. Because I knew that it was that whole thing. You don't know, you're going to be so exposed, right?
Yeah.
So there was no other there was no other option.
That's so interesting. I think it's one thing to, for example, be a football player. And yeah, you perform in front of people, but you have a helmet on, you have pads, you're guarded, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you get hit, yeah, you do all this stuff, but it's like, as an actor, I think you get even more nervous because you're so exposed.
Oh, yeah, it's just...
You're presenting yourself, you're not presenting muscles. I mean, you maybe sometimes are, but you're not you're not just trying to go out there and mindlessly hit people. You have to remember things.
There is the fear of total failure, which
Right.
I think as an actor, especially as an actor who is an understudy or a cover, it's right there yawning in front of you. You're like this pit, and there's a little teeny bridge going across it, and you've walked that bridge hopefully thousands of times in your head and maybe hundreds of times in your body, but the first time you do it for real, when you're rehearsing it, it's a little bridge and that's on the floor, right? So if you step to the right or the left, you're not going to fall. You're just not going to do it right. But when you are in show, and in a show like Spamalot, most of the stage was automated, right? So there are big, monstrous pieces of scenery that are moving. Like, people die if they don't get this shit right.
You could die, yeah.
Yeah, it's a real concern. So, you better know what you're doing and do your best. And then once you've blazed that trail, then you go back and refine it, and it becomes more yours, right? So 2 years in, I had done all of my tracks multiple times, and it didn't cause me the immediate feeling that I'd been shoved off of a 20-story building.
Right. Yeah.
When I was going on, you know what I mean? It was more like, oh, awesome. Okay, I'm going to do these jokes today instead of those jokes today.
Yeah. And I think that, was Spamalot the longest running show you've ever done, or have you done longer running shows?
That was my longest run. I was with the company in different iterations for 5 years.
Yeah. Well, you did things like the Blue Man Group, and you've
Blue Man was a little less than 2. It was between 18 months and 2 years.
Okay. Yeah.
I've done other shows over and over again through the years. I had a production of A Christmas Carol that I did on and off but obviously you don't run that all year. It's just in the holidays. But I did that 11 years on and on, every. So yeah, I mean, but in terms of a long run, that was my longest run.
Yeah. Wow.
But even with that, because I was a cover, there was so much more variety for me than somebody doing the same exact track every single show, 8 shows a week. X number of hundreds, 50 weeks a year. I had 5 tracks, so there was a lot of variety, right? I might not be going on for the same track every time. So for me, there was a lot more variety than just I'm doing my show again, right?
Right.
So.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. So you did, you do Spamalot. You've been on Broadway for a couple years.
Mm-hmm.
You eventually do some film, television, shows, things like that. So, for all of you northern theater and dance folks, Dave Chappelle is a comedian, and he's probably one of the best, and I'm the only one who thinks this is cool, apparently.
He's awesome.
Anyway, Jimmy's worked with him, and I've been wanting to ask you about this. I think I already did ask you about this.
Yeah, we've talked about it a little bit, but maybe not in depth.
Right. Can you talk to me and the rest of YouTube, because let's be real, this will go viral.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so that actually, me doing the Chappelle Show, the first season, actually the premiere episode of the Chappelle Show, actually came from, I was a little frustrated because I had been auditioning for a lot of television and film, and I wasn't booking. And for whatever reason, I was going in all the time, and I was like, I'm doing great auditions. I just don't, what am I not getting? I'm taking class, I'm taking film class. It was just not hitting for whatever reason. And I was really, this was actually before Spamalot. This happened, this was before I got to Broadway. Yeah, I think so. Wow. I'll have to look.
Yeah.
But I was really frustrated, and I was in a place where I knew I was auditioning well. I knew I was putting good stuff in the hopper, and it just wasn't landing. Yeah. And that happens, right? It's up and it's down. You have good times. You have good years and bad years. So I at that point had really good relationships with casting directors. People who, casting directors are the people who the producers go to them and say, who should we see for all these parts? And the casting directors say, I have these 30 guys who would be awesome in this part. And then they call all of us 30 guys in for that part. And the reason they call us is because we have relationships with those casting directors. They're like, Jimmy's great. I love him. He works really hard and always shows up, always knows his stuff. He's on time, blah. So let's get him in here. So I had one casting director in particular, Pat McCorkle, who's wonderful, hard. She was just a great presence in the industry. She was really hard on her people because she expected a lot of excellence from people.
Yeah.
And I think she was a hard, I think I remember hearing she was a hard person to work for, but if she liked you as an actor, she would just go to the mat for you. And she got me cast. She cast me, I don't know how many times over the years, and I just adore her.
So if you work hard, then the people who are hard to work with become easy to work with.
I think it's really about your work ethic, you
Yeah.
know, and if your reputation is that you show up and you show up prepared, and also if you're a good person. So
Yeah.
Pat, I cold called her, you know, and we didn't really have casting directors try to keep that distance, right? It's not, you don't want to be personal. But I was kind of at the end of my rope, and I called her and I was like, Pat, can I just come in and talk to you? She was like, yeah, what's this all about? So I walked down the street. She was down in the 30s at that point, down to like West 37th or 38th, I think, and walked into her office and sat down. She's like, what's up? And I was like, I'm just really frustrated. I'm doing all this. I feel like I'm doing really good auditions. Am I? She was like, yeah, you know that. I mean, follow your instincts. It's like, well, I'm not booking. What's up? Am I done? Do I need to go now? And at this point I hadn't booked Broadway. I think that was part of it. I was like, do I need to just go? Is the biz telling me it's just time to go? Time to go. And she said, no, it's not. You're just going through a period.
A season.
Yep, it's gonna change. And as a matter of fact, hold on a minute. She rifles through some papers on her desk and she's like, so the Chappelle show, you know Dave Chappelle, the comedian? I was like, yeah, I love his stand-up. And she says, well, Comedy Central is they're gonna give him a show. And I hadn't really put these breakdowns out yet. I was about to. I was gonna call you in, but let me just give you the material now. So she hands me the material. She said, it's gonna be soon, I think. I think they wanna get this going fast. And a couple days later, I was taping for that, and then I did 2 or 3 scripts that season. I only made 1 cut because the other scripts got cut down really hard. But and it just started this whole thing with Dave, who I just adore. I think he's a wonderful man. I mean, he speaks very frankly. That's part of his comedy. And
They tried to cancel him.
Yeah,
but,
well, they really effed him over big time. I don't think Comedy Central.
Well, oh, sorry, not Comedy Central. I meant more recently.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
Again, because it's like, don't you get it? This is him. This is his comedy. This is what he does. This is his personality.
Yeah.
He hasn't changed. He's the same person he was X number of years ago when you all thought he was the toast of the town, and all of a sudden he's still doing the same thing, and it was like, that's terrible.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But he's a good man, a loyal man, and we did the show, and I had done, I think, 3 episodes, right? And there were people he worked with for seasons and seasons. I was always booking other work, so I wasn't able to come back to the show.
I'm making sure
But
it's still good.
yeah.
Okay.
But years later, like 2 years later, the show was a massive hit, and he was back out on tour. He was doing the Blackzilla comedy tour, and I happened to be in LA, and I wanted to see the show.
Yeah.
So we got tickets to the show, and I was married to someone else at the time, and my ex-wife and I saw the show. It was hilarious. It was awesome. He did great. And afterwards I said, I'm gonna see if I can say hi. And she was like, are you nuts? He doesn't know you.
And you're like, I am nuts, and I'm saying hi.
I was like, I am nuts, and I'm gonna go backstage. And we knocked on the door, and the security were all there.
Yeah.
It's big, massive, people taking care of Dave. And I was like, hi, you don't know me, but I worked on Dave's show last season, and I would just love to say hi. Hold on a minute. Made a call, and he walks away, and I was like, all right, I guess we should just go. And I turn around, and there's the security walking back. They're like, come with us. And they take us backstage, and they take us onto the bus where Dave is hanging out with a bunch of people, and he's like, what's up? And he's like, man, we're going to have you back next season. It's going to be great. You're going to do all that white shit that you do.
All that white shit.
It's going to be great.
Yes.
You know, and I was just, you know, he could have been making it up, but it really didn't feel like that. I think he's a genuine person.
It felt genuine.
Yeah. And he didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
He didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
He could have just said, I don't know who that is. Get him out of here. Right? But he was like, no, come on the bus. We'll hang out for a bit. And that's what we did.
Well, he remembered you, and he remembered the home stenographer, and
Well, all three. We did we did a bunch of sketches together.
Yeah.
And he actually, he was like, look, I'm sorry the other things didn't make it to air. I was like, dude, I get it. First of all, the one script was not as good. He's like, yeah, I know, because Neil, his co-writer, is a brilliant man, but they were throwing so many ideas at the wall, and you know, in comedy, some things work and some don't. And that's just the nature of the beast. And what a writer sees in his head when he tries to actually make it happen in the air, it just doesn't translate. It's not the same. So you know, that's the process.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting that they gave him a show, and you know, he did 2 seasons, and not too late for a third, Dave. But anyway,
love to see it. You would love to see it.
Yeah, no, but he, I mean, he ended up flying to Africa, and like he just had to get away from all of that, and maybe it was a toxic work environment. I have no idea.
Well, it was a contractual thing. I mean, Comedy Central signed him to a very low-end contract, not thinking that, hey, maybe this will just be this will happen and it won't go anywhere. They had no idea it was going to be the massive hit that it became, which is fine, right? You give people a contract like that if they're not. But once the show became that massive hit, they refused to change his contract. They refused. They were making money hand over fist on his content, and they refused to alter the deal, which they should have done. I mean, they didn't have to because the contract was what it was. But I think it was worth more than that, right? I mean, I don't think that's even a pittance of what they were actually making.
Well, yeah.
So, anyway, they could have done better and probably should have in the end because he walked away, and all that extra whatever else they'd had planned is lost. You know, it'll never be seen.
Yeah,
it's too bad.
And you know, I'm aggressive, and I apologize. Comedy Central, nobody watches you now anyway. Anyway. But if you'd rather go somewhere else and take $50 million, then, well, yeah.
I don't know if that's his thing. It was so hard, too. Putting that all together, they worked their butts off. They worked so hard. Anyway.
Yeah, so now you transition from, you know, you lived in New York City for how long?
30 years.
You lived in New York City for 30 years. After, you know, you lived in the UP, you moved to New York City, lived there for 30 years. You're back in the UP. So this is just a quick little backstory. I remember my first time meeting you was not in person, it was on Zoom.
Yeah.
And then I did my Zoom audition, and you know...
You're still in New York. I was still in New York.
You were still in New York.
Yeah.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, you were wearing like a... I remember what you were wearing, Jimmy. I know it's weird. It was a blue sleeveless shirt.
Okay. I think I have it on right now. Maybe.
I'm not a stalker, but yeah. And then we were talking, and I was asking you about Dave Chappelle even then, and I was asking you about some things, and then eventually we got down to business, and you said, "Well, let's see what you got." And I was like, "What?" And then I was like, "Oh yeah, all right. I have 2 monologues. One is a Jack Sparrow monologue, and then the other is a Pride and Prejudice monologue." And then you were like, "Well, let me hear the Pride and Prejudice. I would not like to hear the Jack Sparrow." Yeah, that's fair. So I do I start doing the Mr. Wickham Pride and Prejudice monologue. Have trouble remembering certain lines. And I'm like, I think I'm like stuttering, and then like I get done with the monologue, and then you said, "I want you in my program." And I was like, come again? I mean, I didn't say that, but I was like, it's messing with me. And then you're like, no, I want you in my program, and I need your commitment. That's what you said. I want you, like, you can be in the program, and I need your commitment. And then, which I think I understand why you reiterated that, but can you just talk to, like, what is the importance of commitment, starting something, finishing something, as an actor, but also with anything?
I mean, I'll just speak to it based on what we are here and what we are building here. Training is so important as an actor, and actors get training in lots of different places. You don't have to go to college, right? It's the best option, I think, for most people. A lot of actors training, it's a really slippery slope when you get to a place like New York or LA, because there are a lot of people that are like, oh, you have to take this class, and you got to take this class, you got to take that, you got to do this, you got to do that, and the money just piles up, right? And to come to a place like this and get the opportunity that we have here and the quality of the training we have here is pretty rare, and I think really special. But what you need to execute that is people who are willing, students who are willing to lead. And I immediately saw that in you. I immediately saw that you had the ability to do that, and you have. I mean, you were my first student. There's all these pictures on the wall right now, BFA cohort, and that top corner was you in black and white, a little less than 3 years ago. And there was one picture up there now, up there, and now there's, I don't know, 40, whatever it is.
Right.
And I needed somebody who could set an example, because setting an example in a training program is really important. Whatever example is being set, because you're a senior, you're getting ready to graduate. The youngsters that are coming in are talented, but they're also looking at the seniors, the juniors and seniors, and going, how does it work here? Even if they're not thinking that consciously, they're seeing what's happening, and they're like, oh, I can do that. I need to rise to that level, or oh, I can get away with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, starting and finishing in a way that enforces the rigor that we have here. Like, we work really, really hard here, and that is one of the recipes, one of the ingredients for success in any industry, but especially in an industry as competitive as professional acting.
Yeah, and I would agree that, it's like Denzel Washington's my favorite actor, one of my favorite actors, and he's a very intense guy. He's like, without discipline, you'll never start. Without consistency, you'll never finish. Sorry about that impression.
True. That's
and
true. I may have to copy that and put it above my desk.
And him and I share a birthday. Him and I share, you know what? We're family. No, we're.
Soon you'll have an Oscar, and whatever.
So thank you so much for your time. This has been fun. It was supposed to go for a half hour. I looked at the time. We're at almost an hour.
Yeah, we're a little over that. Well, listen, you're a terrific interviewer.
Yeah.
Thank you for your preparation, and thank you for your funny. You're great with your interviewees, and I think this is a thing for you. So thanks for including me.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. And Paul Truckee should be the next one. So stay tuned for that.
Good idea.
And we'll see where this goes from here. So thank you so much, Jimmy.
Thanks, man.
Appreciate it.
You bet.